The train whistle pierced the still Wyoming evening air as Heather Zephyr strained against the thick ropes binding her to the cold metal rails. Her golden hair, now tangled and dirty, whipped across her face as she twisted frantically. The vibration beneath her back grew stronger with each passing second, the approaching locomotive's rumble turning her blood to ice. In the fading light of 1879, death was barreling toward her at 40 miles per hour until a shadow appeared on horseback, racing against time and fate. Dust kicked up in spirals as the rider pushed his mount harder, the distance between them closing just as the train rounded the bend. He leapt from the saddle before his horse had fully stopped, boots hitting the ground with a thud as he sprinted the final yards. His hands worked with precise urgency, sawing through the ropes with a gleaming knife. "Hold still, miss," he commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos. The ground trembled violently beneath them as the massive locomotive approached, its whistle screaming like a banshee. In one fluid motion, he severed the final rope and rolled with her off the tracks, shielding her body with his own as the train thundered past, so close that the displaced air tore at their clothing. For several moments, they remained still, the man's arms wrapped protectively around her, his breath warm against her neck. When he finally pulled away, Heather found herself staring into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-weathered face partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Are you hurt, madam?" he asked, his voice gentler now as he helped her sit up. Heather touched her wrists where the ropes had bitten into her skin. I don't think so," she managed, her voice trembling as badly as her hands. "You saved my life." The man nodded curtly, rising to his feet and offering her his hand. "Name's Declan Yates, and saving folks seems to be becoming a habit of mine, though usually not quite so dramatically." She took his calloused hand, allowing him to pull her to her feet. "Heather Zephyr," she replied, swaying slightly as the shock began to set in. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Yates." "Let's start by getting you somewhere safe," he said, whistling for his horse. The magnificent chestnut stallion trotted over obediently. "Then you can tell me who thought tying a lady to train tracks was a good idea." Heather shuddered as the memory crashed over her. "My stepfather's men. They work for Harrison Bragg." Declan's expression darkened. "Bragg? The cattle baron?" He helped her onto his horse before swinging up behind her. "What would Harrison Bragg want with you?" She gripped the saddle horn tightly as the horse began to move. "My mother's land. When she passed last month, she left everything to me. Mr. Bragg has been trying to buy the property for years, but I refused to sell." Her voice caught. "I never thought he'd go this far." Declan's arm tightened slightly around her waist as he guided the horse toward a small cluster of lights in the distance. "Bragg's been pushing folks out all over the territory. Seems he's graduated from threats to something far worse." The rhythmic movement of the horse beneath them was oddly comforting, as was the solid presence of the man behind her. For the first time since her mother's death, Heather felt something besides fear and grief. She felt safe. "Where are we going?" she asked, watching as the lights grew closer. "Silver Creek. Small town, but there's a decent inn and the sheriff's an honest man. We'll get you cleaned up, something to eat, and then figure out what to do about Bragg." The word "we" hung in the air between them, unexpected, but not unwelcome. Heather had been alone in her fight for so long that the simple pronoun felt like a lifeline. "Why would you help me?" she asked quietly. "You don't even know me." She felt rather than saw his shrug. "Let's just say I've crossed paths with Bragg before, and I've got no love for men who prey on those weaker than themselves." There was something in his tone that suggested there was more to the story, but Heather was too exhausted to press. They rode in silence for a while, the town growing steadily larger. Silver Creek was indeed small, a single main street lined with wooden buildings, most dark at this hour except for the saloon, and what appeared to be the inn Declan had mentioned. He dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. Heather winced as her feet touched the ground, her body finally registering the various aches and pains from her ordeal. "You're hurt," Declan observed, frowning at the blood staining her torn dress. "It's nothing," she insisted, though the sharp pain in her side suggested otherwise. "Let's get you inside. Mrs. Thornton keeps clean rooms and doesn't ask too many questions." The inn was quiet, with only a few patrons lingering over late dinners in the small dining room off the main lobby. An older woman with silver-streaked hair looked up from her ledger as they entered, her eyes widening at Heather's disheveled appearance. "Declan Yates, what trouble have you brought to my doorstep this time?" she asked, though her tone held more concern than accusation. "Evening, Mrs. Thornton. The lady needs a room and some privacy. Maybe some hot water and bandages, too." The innkeeper's shrewd eyes took in Heather's condition, from the rope burns on her wrists to the dirt and blood on her dress. Without another word, she reached for a key. "Room 3, upstairs on the right. I'll send up water and something to eat." "Much obliged," Declan said, guiding Heather toward the stairs with a gentle hand at the small of her back. The room was simple but clean, a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a small window overlooking the main street. Heather sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. "Those men who tied you to the tracks," Declan said as he removed his hat and placed it on a hook by the door. "Would you recognize them again?" Heather nodded, pushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yes, they work at Bragg's ranch. One of them, the leader, has a scar across his chin. They caught me when I was returning from town. They said it would look like an accident." Her voice broke on the last word. A soft knock interrupted them. Mrs. Thornton entered with a tray of food, followed by a young girl carrying a steaming pitcher of water and clean cloths. "Eat something," the older woman instructed, setting the tray down. "Then clean up those wounds. I've included some salve that should help." She gave Declan a pointed look. "I expect you'll be needing a room as well? If you've got one to spare. Room 4, across the hall." She handed him another key. "And Declan, Sheriff Granger would probably like to hear about whatever this is." After they left, Heather picked at the simple meal of bread, cheese, and stew, finding she was hungrier than she'd realized. Declan remained by the window, keeping watch on the street below. "You don't think they'll come here, do you?" she asked, setting aside her empty bowl. "Hard to say. If they know you survived, they might. But Bragg usually doesn't do his dirty work in town. Too many witnesses." He turned to face her. "You should clean up and get some rest. We'll talk to the sheriff in the morning." Heather nodded, suddenly self-conscious of her appearance. "Thank you again, Mr. Yates. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." Something flickered in his eyes. Sadness? Regret? Before he nodded. "Get some rest, Miss Zephyr. I'll be right across the hall if you need anything." After he left, Heather poured the warm water into the basin and began the painful process of cleaning her wounds. The torn dress was beyond saving, but Mrs. Thornton had thoughtfully included a simple nightgown on the tray. She changed quickly, wincing at the sight of the bruises already forming across her ribs and back. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the cold metal of the tracks against her back, heard the approaching train. Around midnight, she gave up and moved to the window, gazing out at the quiet street. A movement caught her eye, a rider moving slowly past the inn, looking up at the windows. Even in the dim moonlight, she recognized the distinctive scar on his chin. One of Bragg's men was looking for her. Without thinking, she crossed the hall and knocked softly on Declan's door. He answered immediately, fully dressed except for his boots, his gun belt slung over the back of a chair. "They're here," she whispered urgently. One of them just rode past. Declan moved to his window, peering out cautiously. "I see him. Looks like he's alone, probably scouting." He turned back to her. Get your things. We need to move. Where can we go? I know a place. It's not far, but it'll be safer than here. 5 minutes later, they slipped out the back door of the inn. Declan's horse was waiting in the small stable behind the building. He helped her up, then mounted behind her, guiding the horse quietly through the alley and away from the main street. They rode for nearly an hour, leaving the town behind and heading into the rolling hills that surrounded it. Eventually, they approached a small cabin nestled against a stand of pine trees. Smoke curled from the chimney despite the late hour. My brother's place, Declan explained as they dismounted. He's away, but his wife will be here. The door opened before they reached it, revealing a petite woman with dark hair and a shotgun in her hands. Her wary expression changed to one of relief when she recognized Declan. You're a sight for sore eyes, she said, lowering the weapon. Daniel said you might stop by, but I wasn't expecting you in the middle of the night with company. Sorry for the intrusion, Rose. This is Miss Heather Zephyr. She's in some trouble with Harrison Bragg. Rose's expression darkened at the name. Bragg, is it? Well, any enemy of his is welcome here. Come in, both of you. The cabin was small but warm, with a fire crackling in the stone hearth. Rose quickly prepared a makeshift bed on a cot near the fire and set about making tea, while Declan explained the situation. Sounds like Bragg's getting bolder, she commented, handing Heather a steaming cup. Used to be he just threatened folks or burned them out. Tying someone to train tracks sounds like something out of a dime novel. He's desperate for my land, Heather said. There's a natural spring that feeds into the creek running through the property. With the drought last summer, water rights have become more valuable than ever. And your mother wouldn't sell? Neither will I. Heather's voice was firm despite her exhaustion. That land has been in my family for 3 generations. I won't let Bragg have it, no matter what he does. Rose nodded approvingly. You've got spirit, I'll give you that. But Bragg's dangerous, and he's got the territorial judge in his pocket. Not anymore, Declan interjected. Judge Wilson was replaced last month. The new one, Judge Thornberry, came from back east. Word is, he can't be bought. That explains why Bragg's getting more desperate, Rose mused. If he can't manipulate the law, he'll work outside it. They talked late into the night, formulating a plan. Rose's husband, Daniel, was due back in 2 days from a trip to Cheyenne. He was a deputy marshal and would be able to provide official protection for Heather. Until then, they would stay at the cabin, which was remote enough that Bragg's men were unlikely to find them. When Heather finally drifted off to sleep on the cot by the fire, she felt safer than she had in weeks. The last thing she saw before closing her eyes was Declan sitting by the window, his profile outlined by moonlight, keeping watch. Morning came with the smell of coffee and bacon. Heather opened her eyes to find Rose moving quietly around the small kitchen area, while Declan was nowhere to be seen. Good morning, Rose said, noticing Heather was awake. How are you feeling? Heather sat up slowly, taking inventory of her various aches and pains. Better than I expected, she admitted. Where's Mr. Yates? Declan rode out at first light to check the area. He should be back soon. Rose brought over a cup of coffee. He told me more about how he found you. That was a close call. Too close, Heather agreed, gratefully accepting the cup. I still don't understand why he was there at that exact moment. The tracks are miles from town, and it was getting dark. Rose hesitated, as if debating how much to say. Declan has a way of being in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place at the wrong time, depending on how you look at it. Before Heather could ask what she meant, the door opened and Declan entered, bringing with him the crisp scent of the autumn morning. His eyes immediately sought Heather, a flicker of what might have been relief crossing his features when he saw her awake. No sign of Bragg's men, he reported, removing his hat. But I rode by your property, Miss Zephyr. They've got men watching it. Heather's heart sank. Then they know I survived. Seems that way. They'll be looking for you. Rose placed a plate of food in front of Declan. Eat. Then we can figure out what to do next. As they ate, Heather studied Declan more carefully than she had been able to the night before. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps only a few years older than her own 22 years. Beneath the trail dust and stubble was a face more handsome than rough, with those startling blue eyes that seemed to notice everything. "Mr. Yates," she began, "you never said what you were doing out by the railroad tracks yesterday evening." He paused, fork halfway to his mouth. "I was tracking someone." "Who?" "A man who robbed the bank in Clearwater last week. He shot the teller, an old friend of mine." His voice was measured, revealing little emotion, but Heather sensed the anger beneath the calm surface. "You're a bounty hunter?" she asked, trying to reconcile this information with the man who had saved her life. "Sometimes," he admitted, "when the cause is right. Mostly I do odd jobs, ranch work, whatever's needed." Rose snorted softly. "What Declan isn't telling you is that he used to be a Pinkerton agent. One of their best, according to my husband." Declan shot her an irritated look. "That was a long time ago." 3 years isn't that long," Rose countered. "And those skills are why you're still alive, considering the trouble you find." Heather looked between them, sensing there was more to the story. "Is that how you crossed paths with Harrison Bragg before? When you were a Pinkerton?" Declan's jaw tightened. "Something like that." He stood abruptly. "I should check on the horse." After he left, Heather turned to Rose. "Did I say something wrong?" Rose sighed, refilling their coffee cups. "It's not you. Declan and Bragg have a complicated history. Back when Declan was with the Pinkertons, he was investigating some cattle rustling operations in the territory. The trail led to one of Bragg's foremen, but before Declan could gather enough evidence, there was an incident." "What kind of incident?" "Bragg's men ambushed Declan and his partner. His partner didn't survive. Declan nearly didn't either." Rose's voice softened. "He resigned from the agency after that. Said he couldn't work for people who cared more about recovering stolen cattle than bringing murderers to justice." Heather felt a chill despite the warm fire. "And the men who killed his partner?" "Never charged. Not enough evidence, according to the territorial judge who, as you might guess, was in Bragg's pocket." Rose glanced toward the door. "Declan doesn't talk about it much, but I know he's never forgotten. Or forgiven." The pieces were falling into place. "So when he saw me on those tracks and realized Bragg was behind it, it became personal," Rose finished. "More than it already was." Heather contemplated this new information as she helped Rose clean up after breakfast. By the time Declan returned, she had made a decision. "Mr. Yates," she said firmly, "I appreciate everything you've done for me, but I can't let you risk your life in my quarrel with Harrison Bragg. Once your brother returns, I'll ask him to help me file charges against Bragg's men, and then I'll figure out how to protect my land." Declan regarded her steadily. "With all due respect, Miss Zephyr, filing charges won't be enough. Bragg won't stop until he gets what he wants, or until someone stops him." "And you think that someone should be you?" she challenged. "I think that someone should be us," he corrected. "You've got the legal right to the land, and I've got experience dealing with men like Bragg." "And a personal grudge," she added softly. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Rose has been talking. She's concerned about you, as am I." Heather stepped closer. "I won't be responsible for anyone else getting hurt because of Harrison Bragg." "This isn't about responsibility," Declan said, his voice low and intense. "It's about justice. For you, for my partner, for everyone Bragg has ever bullied or threatened or worse." They stared at each other for a long moment, neither willing to back down. Finally, Rose cleared her throat. "As fascinating as it is watching you two try to out-stubborn each other, perhaps we should focus on the immediate problem. Bragg's men are looking for Heather, and they won't give up easily. Declan broke eye contact first. Rose is right. We need to stay hidden until Daniel returns. Then we can figure out our next move. The day passed slowly. Heather helped Rose with chores around the cabin while Declan disappeared for hours at a time, scouting the surrounding area. By evening, the tension between them had eased somewhat, replaced by a cautious truce. After dinner, Rose excused herself early, leaving Heather and Declan alone by the fire. For a while they sat in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the flames and the occasional hoot of an owl outside. "Tell me about your land," Declan said eventually. Heather looked up from the mending Rose had given her. "It's not much compared to Bragg's holdings, just 100 acres with a small house and barn. But the valley is beautiful, especially in spring when the wildflowers bloom." Her voice softened with memory. "My father chose that spot because of the view from the front porch. He said a man could die happy if the last thing he saw was that valley at sunset." "Is that what happened?" "Yes. Consumption took him when I was 16. He died in his rocking chair on that porch, just like he wanted." She set aside the mending. "My mother kept the place going after he passed. She was determined that I would have my inheritance intact, even when Bragg started pressuring her to sell." "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was." Heather blinked back unexpected tears. "I miss her more than I can say." Declan was quiet for a moment. "My mother died when I was young. My father raised my brother and me on his own. He wasn't much for talking about feelings, but he taught us to respect strong women." A small smile touched his lips. "He'd have liked your mother, I think." "And what about your father? Is he still alive?" The smile faded. "No, he was killed in the war fighting for the Union. I was 18. Daniel 16. "I'm sorry," Heather said softly. "It seems we've both lost too much." Declan's gaze met hers across the small space between them. "Maybe that's why we're both so stubborn about what we have left." The moment stretched between them, something unspoken passing in the firelit air. Then Declan stood, breaking the spell. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." Heather nodded, suddenly aware of her racing heart. "Good night, Mr. Yates." He paused at the door to the small bedroom he was using. "Declan," he said, "I think we're past formalities, don't you?" She smiled slightly. "Good night, Declan." "Good night, Heather." She lay awake for a long time after he left, replaying their conversation in her mind. There was something about Declan Yates that drew her, beyond gratitude for saving her life. A steadiness, a sense of honor that reminded her of her father. And beneath his reserved exterior, she sensed a depth of feeling that matched her own. Dawn broke with a clatter of hooves in the yard. Declan was instantly alert, gun in hand as he moved to the window. "It's Daniel," he announced, the tension leaving his shoulders. Rose was already at the door, throwing it open to embrace her husband as he entered. Daniel Yates was taller than his brother, but with the same blue eyes and determined set to his jaw. He greeted Declan with a firm handshake that turned into a brief hug. "Rose told me what happened," he said, turning to Heather. "Miss Zephyr, I'm sorry for what you've been through." "Thank you, Deputy Yates," she replied. "I'm grateful for your hospitality." "Daniel will do fine," he said with a smile that reminded her of Declan's. "Now, let's talk about what we're going to do about Harrison Bragg." Over breakfast, they discussed options. Daniel had brought news from Cheyenne. A federal judge would be arriving in the territory within the week to hear cases, bypassing the territorial court entirely. "If we can get affidavits from witnesses and present evidence of Bragg's intimidation tactics, the federal judge could issue warrants," Daniel explained. "But we need more than just your word against his men, Miss Zephyr." "Call me Heather, please," she said. "And I understand. But who would testify against Bragg? Everyone's too afraid." "Not everyone," Declan interjected. "Tom Jenkins lost his farm to Bragg last year. And there's old Mrs. Wilson, whose son was beaten when he refused to sell their mining claim. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. It's a start. If we can show a pattern of intimidation and violence, we need more than that, Rose cut in. We need to catch Bragg's men in the act of something illegal, something that can't be explained away. Heather straightened suddenly. I think I know how we might do that. All eyes turned to her as she outlined her plan. It was dangerous, but if it worked, they would have the evidence they needed to bring Bragg to justice once and for all. Absolutely not, Declan said firmly when she finished. It's too risky. I agree, Daniel added. Using yourself as bait is out of the question. It's the only way, Heather insisted. Bragg's men are looking for me. If I return to my property openly, they'll report back to him. He'll send them to intimidate me, or worse. You and the sheriff can be waiting to catch them in the act. And if they decide to skip the intimidation and go straight to murder? Declan demanded. They won't, she said, with more confidence than she felt. Bragg's too careful for that. He'll want it to look like an accident, like with the train. That takes planning. Rose and Daniel exchanged glances. She has a point, Rose admitted reluctantly. It could work, Daniel said slowly. But we'd need to plan every detail, have men in position before Heather even sets foot on her property. Declan shook his head. It's too dangerous. There has to be another way. What would you suggest? Heather challenged. Wait for Bragg to come after me again? Hide forever? This is my fight, Declan. Let me be part of ending it. Their eyes locked in another battle of wills. This time, it was Declan who looked away first. Fine, he conceded grudgingly. But we do this my way. Every step planned, every contingency covered. And at the first sign of trouble, you get out. Agreed? Heather nodded. Agreed. They spent the rest of the day planning. Daniel would ride to Silver Creek to speak with Sheriff Granger and gather trusted men. Rose would spread word among the women in town that Heather had been seen returning to her property, ensuring the gossip reached Bragg's informants. We'll need at least a day to get everything in place, Daniel said as evening approached. I'll ride into town now and start making arrangements. After he left, Rose insisted on showing Heather some of her husband's clothes that could be altered to fit her. You can't go back to your property in a borrowed nightgown, she pointed out practically. Left alone, Declan paced the cabin like a caged wolf. He was still pacing when Heather returned, wearing a simple blouse and skirt that Rose had quickly altered. You don't have to do this, he said without preamble. Heather sat down across from him. Yes, I do. For my parents, for the land they loved. For myself. She paused. And for your partner who never got justice. Declan stilled. This isn't about vengeance, isn't it? At least partly? She held his gaze steadily. I'm not judging you, Declan. I understand wanting to right a wrong. But I need to know that when the time comes, you'll be thinking clearly, that you won't take unnecessary risks because of what happened in the past. He was silent for a long moment. 3 years ago, I watched my partner die because I wasn't fast enough, smart enough, to see the trap Bragg's men had set. His name was Michael. He had a wife and a baby daughter he never got to see grow up. Declan's voice was raw with emotion. So yes, part of this is personal. But I promise you, Heather, I won't let my desire for justice cloud my judgment. Not when your life is at stake. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. Without thinking, she reached across and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. We'll do this together, she said softly, and we'll both be careful. He nodded, his thumb tracing a small circle on the back of her hand. The simple touch sent a shiver up her arm. I should help Rose with dinner, she said, reluctantly withdrawing her hand. Heather. His voice stopped her at the door. Thank you. For understanding. She smiled back at him, suddenly shy. Thank you for caring enough to worry. The next day passed in a flurry of preparations. Daniel returned with news that Sheriff Granger had agreed to help and had deputized 4 reliable men. They would position themselves around Heather's property that night, ready for her arrival the following morning. The plan is simple, Daniel explained over lunch. Heather rides openly to her property tomorrow at mid-morning. She goes about her business as if she's been away visiting relatives and has just returned. Declan will stay with her, posing as a hired hand she brought back with her. The rest of us will be hidden, watching and waiting. And if Bragg's men take the bait? Rose asked. When they make a move, any move that's clearly threatening, we arrest them. With multiple witnesses, including a deputy marshal and a sheriff, their testimony should be enough to convince the federal judge to issue warrants for Bragg and anyone else involved. It sounded straightforward, but Heather could see the concern in Declan's eyes. There were too many variables, too many things that could go wrong. That evening, Rose insisted on braiding Heather's hair, claiming it would help her sleep more comfortably. As her fingers worked through the golden strands, she spoke quietly. I've known Declan for 5 years, ever since he pulled my Daniel out of a burning saloon in Laramie. In all that time, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Heather felt her cheeks warm. He saved my life. It's natural he'd feel responsible for me. Rose made a skeptical noise. That man has saved plenty of lives without getting that particular look in his eyes. Trust me, it's more than responsibility. Even if that were true, Heather said carefully, tomorrow we'll be facing Bragg's men. After that, who knows what will happen? That's exactly my point. Rose tied off the braid with a ribbon. Life out here is uncertain. When you find something worth holding on to, you shouldn't let it slip away because the timing isn't perfect. It never will be. Later, unable to sleep, Heather stepped outside for some fresh air. The night was clear. Stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. She wrapped her borrowed shawl tighter against the autumn chill. Couldn't sleep. Declan's voice came from the shadows near the corner of the cabin. Too much on my mind, she admitted as he stepped into view. What's your excuse? Same. He moved to stand beside her, both of them gazing up at the stars. Nervous about tomorrow? A little, she confessed, but also ready for it to be over, ready to live without looking over my shoulder. They stood in companionable silence for a while, their shoulders almost touching. What will you do after? He asked eventually. If we succeed in bringing Bragg to justice? Heather considered the question. Go back to my land, rebuild what my parents started. It won't be easy alone, but it's what they would have wanted. She glanced at him. What about you? Back to tracking bounties? Declan shrugged. Maybe. Haven't thought that far ahead. No home to go back to? Not for a long time. There was a wistfulness in his voice that tugged at her heart. You could stay, she said impulsively. In the area, I mean. I'm sure there's work for someone with your skills. He turned to face her, his expression hidden in the shadows. Is that what you want? For me to stay? Her heart beat faster. I wouldn't mind the company. Of a friend, she added hastily. A friend, he repeated, something indefinable in his tone. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Is that all we are, Heather? Friends? She looked up at him, suddenly breathless. I don't know. What do you think we are? Instead of answering, he reached up to brush a stray lock of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. The touch was gentle, questioning. Heather felt herself leaning into it, her eyes never leaving his. I think, he said softly, that I've never met anyone quite like you. And I think that scares me more than facing Bragg's men tomorrow. Why? She whispered. Because I've spent 3 years not letting myself care too much about anything or anyone. It was safer that way. His thumb traced the curve of her cheek. Then I found you tied to those tracks, and suddenly everything changed. Heather's heart hammered in her chest. Declan. Whatever she might have said was lost as he bent his head and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, tentative at first, then deepening as she responded. His arms slid around her waist, drawing her closer, and she found her hands resting against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Declan rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since I first saw you look at me with those brave eyes, even when you were scared half to death. She smiled, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. I've been wanting you to do that since you stood up to me in Rose's cabin and refused to let me face Bragg alone. He chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her hands. So were both stubborn fools. Apparently so. They might have stayed that way longer, wrapped in each other's arms beneath the stars, if not for the sound of the cabin door opening. If you two are quite finished, Rose's amused voice called, you should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Reluctantly, they separated. Declan caught Heather's hand, bringing it to his lips for a brief kiss that sent shivers down her spine. Get some rest, he murmured. I'll see you in the morning. She nodded, suddenly unable to form words. As she turned to go inside, she heard him speak once more. Heather, whatever happens tomorrow, remember this moment. Remember that someone is waiting for you to come back safe. Morning dawned clear and cold. A light frost silvering the grass around the cabin. They ate breakfast mostly in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the day ahead. Daniel reviewed the plan one final time before he left to join the sheriff and his deputies at their positions. Remember, he told Heather and Declan, act natural. Go about normal activities. Give Bragg's men time to report back and receive new orders. We'll be watching. Rose hugged Heather tightly before they left. Be careful, she whispered. And bring him back in one piece, will you? I've grown rather fond of my brother-in-law. The ride to Heather's property took nearly 2 hours. As they crested the final hill, the small farmhouse came into view, nestled in the valley just as Heather had described. Even from a distance, it was clear the place had been searched. The front door hung askew on its hinges, and items were scattered across the yard. Heather's grip on the reins tightened. They had no right, she said, her voice tight with anger. We'll set it right, Declan promised, riding close beside her. All of it. They approached openly, making no attempt to hide their arrival. As they dismounted in front of the house, Declan squeezed her hand briefly, a reminder that she wasn't alone. The inside of the house was worse than the yard furniture overturned. Drawers emptied onto the floor, her mother's china cabinet shattered. Heather moved through the rooms in stunned silence, occasionally picking up a broken memento before setting it down again. They were looking for something, Declan observed, examining the destruction. Probably the deed to the property. It's not here, Heather said. My mother kept it in a lockbox at the bank in Silver Creek. She knelt to gather the scattered pages of her father's Bible. This was senseless cruelty. Declan helped her straighten the overturned table. Let's get this place in order. Make it look like you're here to stay. They worked side by side for several hours, righting furniture, sweeping up broken glass, and hanging the door back on its repaired hinges. Around mid-afternoon, Declan paused, his head tilted slightly as if listening. Riders coming, he said quietly. 2 of them, from the sound of it. Heather's heart rate quickened. Bragg's men? Most likely. Remember the plan, act natural. Let them make the first move. He picked up a hammer, pretending to work on the porch railing as the riders came into view. They were rough-looking men, trail-dusty and armed. One of them, Heather noted with a chill, had the distinctive scar across his chin that she remembered from the train tracks. They reined in their horses a few yards from the house, eyeing Declan warily. Can I help you, gentlemen? Heather called from the doorway, forcing her voice to remain steady. The scarred man spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the dirt. "Heard you was back, Miss Zephyr. Mr. Bragg sent us to check on you, make sure everything was all right." "That's very kind of Mr. Bragg," she replied, stepping onto the porch. "Though I don't recall asking for his concern." The second man snickered. "Seems you had some trouble while you was away. Place is a mess." "Nothing I can't handle," she said coolly. "Please tell Mr. Bragg I appreciate his interest, but I'm quite capable of managing my own affairs." The scarred man dismounted, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. "Thing is, Miss Zephyr, Mr. Bragg is still mighty interested in purchasing this property. Sent us with a new offer." He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "Double what he offered your ma." Heather descended the porch steps, aware of Declan tensing behind her. She took the envelope but didn't open it. "My answer remains the same. The land is not for sale, at any price." The man's false smile faded. "Mr. Bragg won't take kindly to that answer. He's a powerful man in these parts. Be a shame if more accidents was to happen." "Are you threatening me, sir?" Heather asked, her voice sharper now. The scarred man stepped closer. "Just stating facts, madam. Railroad's dangerous. So's living all alone out here. Fires happen. Animals go missing." His eyes flicked to Declan. "Hired help can't be everywhere at once." Declan moved to stand beside Heather. "I think you'd better leave now." The second man dismounted, his hand hovering near his gun. "And who might you be, friend?" "Someone who doesn't like threats against women," Declan replied evenly, "especially from men who tie them to train tracks." The scarred man's eyes narrowed. "Don't know what you're talking about, mister." "I think you do," Heather said, finding courage in Declan's presence. "And I think Sheriff Granger and Deputy Marshal Yates would be very interested to hear about it." A flash of uncertainty crossed the scarred man's face, quickly replaced by menace. "Lawmen come and go in these parts. Accidents happen to them, too." "That sounds an awful lot like a threat against federal officers," came Daniel's voice as he stepped from behind the barn, rifle in hand. Sheriff Granger and his deputies emerged from various hiding places around the property, all armed and focused on Bragg's men. The scarred man went for his gun, but Declan was faster. In one smooth motion, he drew his pistol and struck the man across the temple with the barrel, sending him crumpling to the ground. The second man raised his hands immediately. "Harrison Bragg send you boys out here to threaten Miss Zephyr?" Sheriff Granger asked, approaching with his rifle trained on the standing man. "Just delivering a message," the man mumbled. "A message that included references to accidents and the railroad?" Daniel added, kicking the fallen man's gun away. "Sounded like a death threat to me. How about you, Sheriff?" "Sure did," Granger agreed. "And threatening a federal officer? That's a serious offense." He nodded to his deputies. "Take them into custody. We'll let Judge Harrington sort them out when he arrives." As the deputies bound the men's wrists, Daniel turned to Heather and Declan. "You two all right?" Heather nodded, suddenly aware that she was trembling. "Will this be enough? To stop Bragg?" "It's a start," Daniel said. "With their testimony and the witnesses to their threats today, we can get warrants. Bragg's empire is built on intimidation. Once people see he's not untouchable, more will come forward." Sheriff Granger joined them. "Miss Zephyr, I'd advise you not to stay here alone until this is settled. Bragg won't take this lying down." "She won't be alone," Declan said firmly, his hand finding Heather's. "I'll be staying." Daniel raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "We should get these two to the jail," Granger said, gesturing to the prisoners. "I'll leave a deputy here tonight, just as a precaution." As they led the men away, Heather sagged against Declan, the tension of the confrontation finally catching up with her. "It's over," she whispered. "At least this part." Declan's arm wrapped around her shoulders. "It went better than I expected. No shots fired, No one hurt. Except that man's head when you hit him with your pistol, she pointed out with a small smile. He deserved worse, Declan said, his voice hardening. He's the one who tied you to those tracks. I recognized him from your description. Heather shuddered at the memory. What happens now? Now, he said, guiding her back toward the house. We wait for Judge Harrington to arrive. Daniel will make sure Bragg's men talk, and we start putting your home back together. Over the next few days, they fell into an unexpected domestic rhythm. Declan repaired what could be fixed around the house while Heather sorted through the wreckage, salvaging family treasures and discarding what was beyond repair. The Deputy Granger had left, kept a discreet watch from the barn, occasionally helping with heavier tasks. On the third evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Daniel rode up with news. Judge Harrington arrived this morning, he announced, accepting the cup of coffee Heather offered. He's issued warrants for Harrison Bragg and 3 of his foremen based on the testimony of the men we arrested. They talked? Declan asked, surprised. Daniel grinned. Amazing what men will say when faced with federal charges and the prospect of a hanging. Turns out Bragg's been orchestrating more than just intimidation. Cattle rustling, claim jumping, even a murder 2 years back, all tied to him now. Will it be enough to convict him? Heather asked. Judge thinks so. Bragg was arrested this afternoon at his ranch. They're bringing him to Silver Creek for a hearing tomorrow. Daniel's expression grew serious. You should both be there. Your testimony about the train tracks will be important. That night, Heather found sleep elusive. The prospect of facing Harrison Bragg in court the next day filled her with dread, despite knowing he would be in custody. Around midnight, she gave up and made her way to the kitchen for some tea. She found Declan already there, staring into a cup of his own. Can't sleep either? She asked softly. He looked up, a small smile touching his lips. Too much on my mind. Heather prepared her tea and joined him at the table. Are you thinking about tomorrow? About seeing Bragg? Partly, he admitted. 3 years I've waited for this. Hard to believe it's finally happening. Are you worried he'll somehow escape justice again? Declan shook his head. Not this time. Too many witnesses, too much evidence. Judge Harrington has a reputation for being thorough and fair. Heather studied him in the dim lamplight. Then what's keeping you awake? He was silent for a long moment, turning the cup between his hands. I've been thinking about what comes after. When this is over. Her heart quickened. And? What have you decided? That depends, he said, his eyes finding hers. On what you want. Heather reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. I want you to stay, Declan. Not just as protection or hired help. I want you to stay because... She paused, gathering her courage. Because I think I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. For a terrible moment, Declan was silent, and Heather feared she had misread everything between them. Then he turned his hand to clasp hers, his fingers warm and strong. I've been falling since I cut you free from those tracks, he said quietly. I just didn't want to admit it to myself. Caring about people hasn't worked out well for me in the past. Is that still how you feel? He shook his head slowly. No. These past few days, working beside you, seeing your strength and determination, I can't imagine being anywhere else now. He lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her fingers. I love you, Heather Zephyr. And if you'll have me, I'd like to build a life here with you. Joy bubbled up inside her, bright and effervescent. I'll have you, Declan Yates. On one condition. His eyebrow lifted in query. Kiss me properly, she whispered. Like you did under the stars. With a smile that transformed his entire face, Declan rose and pulled her gently to her feet. His arms encircled her waist as hers wound around his neck, and when their lips met, it felt like coming home after a long journey. The hearing the next day was held in Silver Creek's small courthouse. It seemed the entire town had turned out to witness the proceedings against Harrison Bragg, the cattle baron who had terrorized the region for years. Bragg himself was a surprise to Heather, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s with silver at his temples and an air of confidence that even handcuffs couldn't diminish. He looked more like a banker than a criminal mastermind. When it was her turn to testify, Heather felt her throat go dry at the sight of Bragg's cold eyes following her to the witness stand. But then she caught Declan's reassuring gaze from the gallery, and her voice found its strength as she recounted the terrifying experience of being tied to the railroad tracks. Judge Harrington, a stern man with wire-rimmed spectacles, listened intently to all testimony. When Declan took the stand and revealed his past as a Pinkerton agent investigating Bragg, a murmur ran through the crowded courtroom. His account of his partner's murder and his own near death at the hands of Bragg's men added weight to the prosecution's case. By the end of the day, Judge Harrington had heard enough. He ordered Bragg held without bail to await trial, along with his foreman and the men who had carried out his orders. "It may take months for the full trial," Daniel explained as they left the courthouse, "but Bragg won't be free to threaten anyone in the meantime. And with all the evidence and witnesses coming forward now, his days of power in this territory are over." That evening, they celebrated at Rose and Daniel's cabin. The mood was festive, a weight lifted from all their shoulders. As the night wore on, Declan led Heather outside to the spot where they had shared their first kiss. "I've been thinking," he said, taking both her hands in his, "about our future." "What about it?" she asked, smiling up at him in the moonlight. "Your land needs a lot of work. The house, the barn, the fences. It's more than one person can manage alone." Heather's smile widened. "Are you offering your services as a hired hand, Mr. Yates?" "No," he said seriously. "I'm offering something more permanent." To her astonishment, he lowered himself to one knee, still holding her hands. "Heather Zephyr, I know we haven't known each other long, but I've seen your courage, your determination, your heart. I've fallen in love with all of it, all of you. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Joy bubbled up inside her, bright and unstoppable. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Declan, yes." He rose and swept her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally broke apart, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slid it onto her finger. "Daniel kept it all these years. Said he was saving it for when I found the right woman." "It's perfect," she said, admiring how it caught the moonlight. "Just like this moment." Rose and Daniel were delighted by the news, Rose claiming she'd known from the start that they were meant for each other. "Only took a near-death experience, a dangerous criminal, and a federal hearing to bring you together," she teased. "Nothing complicated at all." They were married 2 weeks later in Silver Creek's small church, with Daniel standing as best man and Rose as matron of honor. Sheriff Granger and his wife attended, along with several townspeople who had come to admire Heather's courage in standing up to Harrison Bragg. After the ceremony, they returned to the farmhouse, their home now. Declan carried Heather across the threshold in the traditional manner, setting her down in the front room that they had painstakingly restored together. "Welcome home, Mrs. Yates," he said softly. "It sounds wonderful when you say it," she replied, reaching up to touch his cheek. Later, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset over the valley, Heather rested her head against her husband's shoulder. "My father was right," she murmured. "This is the most beautiful view in the territory." Declan's arm tightened around her. "Second most beautiful," he corrected, pressing a kiss to her temple. "The first is sitting right beside me." Spring brought new life to the valley. Under Declan's skilled hands, the farm flourished. They planted crops, repaired fences, and added to the small herd of cattle Heather's father had started years before. Word came that Harrison Bragg had been convicted and sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison. His empire dismantled and his lands sold off to smaller ranchers who had once lived in fear of him. As summer approached, Heather shared news of her own with Declan. They would be welcoming a child in the winter. The joy on his face when she told him was something she would treasure forever. "A family," he said in wonder, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our family." In December, as snow blanketed the valley in pristine white, their daughter was born, a healthy girl with Heather's golden hair and Declan's blue eyes. They named her Elizabeth Rose, after both their mothers. On a clear winter's evening, as Heather nursed their infant daughter by the fireplace, Declan sat beside them, his arm protectively around his wife's shoulders. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted quietly. "A home, a family, peace." Heather leaned into his embrace. "Neither did I, after my parents died. I thought I'd spend my life alone, just trying to hold on to this land. And now?" She smiled up at him, her heart full. "Now I know that the land was never the real inheritance my parents left me. It was the capacity to love, to build something meaningful, to find happiness even after loss." She touched their daughter's downy head. "That's what we'll pass on to Elizabeth, along with this valley." Declan pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I still think about that day sometimes. What if I'd been a few minutes later reaching those tracks? What if I hadn't heard the train whistle and changed my course?" "But you did," she reminded him. "You were exactly where you needed to be, exactly when I needed you most." "Some might call that fate," he mused. "I call it the beginning of our story," Heather replied. "And it's a story I never tire of telling." Outside, snow continued to fall gently on the valley, wrapping their home in a peaceful silence. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, illuminating the faces of the family who had found each other against all odds, a brave woman who refused to surrender what was rightfully hers, a determined man who had finally found something worth fighting for, and the child who represented their shared future. For Declan and Heather Yates, the adventure that had begun in terror on a set of train tracks had transformed into something beautiful, a love as vast as the Wyoming sky and as enduring as the mountains that watched over their valley home. As years passed, their family grew. Elizabeth was joined by a brother, Michael Daniel, named for Declan's fallen partner and his brother. The children thrived in the valley, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with chores as they grew older, and absorbing the values their parents instilled: courage, honesty, and a deep respect for the land that sustained them. The Yates Ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Declan's experience and Heather's determination proved a formidable combination. They expanded their holdings, purchasing some of Bragg's former land when it came up for auction, turning what had once been a symbol of intimidation into a place where neighboring ranchers gathered for seasonal cattle drives and community celebrations. When Elizabeth turned 16, Declan presented her with a finely crafted saddle. "Your mother was about your age when she took over running this place after her father died," he told his daughter. "She had more courage than folks twice her age. And your father saved me from more trouble than I care to remember," Heather added with a fond smile at her husband. "You saved each other," Elizabeth observed with the wisdom that sometimes surprised her parents. "That's the real story, isn't it?" And indeed it was. Through drought years and harsh winters, through moments of joy and sorrow, Declan and Heather faced life's challenges together, their bond only strengthening with time. On their 20th wedding anniversary, they stood on the porch at sunset, just as they had countless times before. Declan's hair was touched with silver now, and fine lines had appeared at the corners of Heather's eyes, but when they looked at each other, they still saw the same people who had found each other in a moment of desperate courage beside a set of train tracks. 20 years, Declan mused, his arm around her waist. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I cut you free from those ropes. Heather leaned into his embrace. And sometimes it feels like I've loved you all my life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber, they stood in comfortable silence, watching their legacy unfold before them, the land they had protected, the home they had built, the family they had created. "We did good, didn't we?" Declan said softly. Heather smiled up at the man who had rescued her in more ways than one. "Yes, my love, we did very good indeed."